What up, what up, what up? It is Thursday, December 19th. Today on Reported, I have more coverage of the aftermath of the election. My last couple of videos about Black and non-Black racial minority group voting trends really pushed a button. There's a lot of activity in the comments. And so here to make it make sense and further tease that out is Jared Loggins, a professor of Black Studies and Political Science at Amherst College in Massachusetts. Hi, Jared. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, in the hours right after the election, we learned a few different things. One, that for the most part, Black voting groups backed Harris, and then in a significantly larger percentage of how the other non-Black racial groups voted. So, Latinx, Asian, other racial groups, for the most part, went with Trump. What is your sense of how that is playing out now that we're 7 weeks out, or 7 or 8 weeks out of election?
I'm nervous. I mean, it's not clear if the kind of coalitions that have sustained over the last decade in the wake of, let's say, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Ferguson uprising, the George Floyd uprising, it's not clear if those alliances and coalitions will sustain. I mean, if we go back to 2016, after Trump's election, I mean, almost immediately we have the Women's March, right? So we had, and this is a kind of multiracial, kind of intersectional movement. It was mobilized, and folks were kind of connecting kind of economic concerns with reproductive justice, connecting it to racial justice. So you had a real sense that the alliances were kind of necessary to contain Trump, to contain his worst excesses. I mean, there were a number, we can get into it if we have time, but there were a number of kind of competing forces that were trying to contain Trump. One of them was multiracial organizing at the grassroots level. Part of that has to do with the fact that, over the last 20 years, with the Trayvon Martin uprising, with Ferguson, I think we really had the built up the muscle memory around organizing in a kind of intersectional way. Um, that has come, or the fear is that it's come completely undone.
Mm. So there's
Um,
a lot of
Go ahead.
theorizing
Yeah,
about why. Like, what about this election was the turning point in kind of dissolving, in many ways, that coalition that you just described?
yeah. It's complicated. I mean, for one thing, in 2020, we see really one of those massive and sustained demonstrations and movements in American history. Probably since 1968 since 1968 in the sort of freedom movements of the 1960s, we haven't seen kind of this much widespread discontent pouring out into the streets. It was a kind of multiracial kind of organizing apparatus on the ground. And again, primed by the fact that we've seen over the last several decades just this constant, persistent desire to to organize, to reach out to people, to do kind of multilateral organizing, thinking about, at the political level, the level of formal politics, at the level of kind of legal aid. I mean, we're just seeing a massive kind of well-oiled machine grow and develop. And it came under that organizing apparatus came under a number of different competing pressures. One of them is sort of state repression. Um, you saw a lot of sort of policing of the kind of demands that were being made. Um, you saw this sort of intense, particularly with respect to the kind of defund movement. There was lots of PR and propaganda that was put out there to essentially malign that movement, and I think it sort of produced these conflicts that
Okay.
showed up within different kind of coalitions. People were like having to negotiate. Okay, how do I stand in relationship to defund? It's too radical that I have to position myself in this or that way. So I
Hmm.
think that's one. I think that's one thing. So and I say that to kind of draw out just how split and fragile coalitions are already. So when you have, kind of claims about, particularly with respect to the George Floyd uprisings, that like defund is divisive, that is going to unleash, criminals on the street. No one wants to be associated with that. And rather than kind of struggling against or trying to sort of compete against those narratives and to push back against it, I think a lot of people sort of resigned and made certain kinds of choices that only intensified over the course of the kind of 4 years of the Biden presidency, right? And in some ways, Democrats like played into that.
Hmm.
Um, at the same time, I think, you know, because um the Floyd uprising was so suppressed, it also meant that the organizing uh sort of coalitions that animated the George Floyd uprisings were, I mean, they came under significant pressure. Folks, when you think about organizing, like it's already challenging. People make sacrifices, right? They have work, they have other obligations. They have to take care of family, right? So when you couple the kind of just the ordinary demands of life that people have to face with state repression, um, with having to sort of compete with different factions within movements. Movements aren't united,
Right.
coalitions aren't united. So all of those things make it really, really difficult to sustain.
Yes.
Um,
And what I'm
yeah.
hearing is there were fractures present in the coalition dating back to George Floyd, maybe even dating back to Trayvon Martin,
Mhm.
and the election just sort of exasperated them and really brought them to the surface and resurfaced them again. What then can we do in terms of the feeling of betrayal that is there, and also the feelings of not meeting the expectation typically associated with those coalitions?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think part of it is continuing to organize. Just continue to organize. I mean, for my part, I'm very much committed to this idea that we have to think big about about organizing. I mean, it's the only way to really effectively respond to the Trump presidency or to this moment. It's the only way.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, I think exhaustion plays a role. I think there is like antipathy, particularly among Black voters. It's to the sense of betrayal that you're sort of tracking. I
Yeah,
think
I mean, it's
I
all
think
in the comments of my previous videos, so I wanted to ask you directly about that.
I think that's that is there. For me, I think part of the answer involves like actually having conversations with people and assessing their rationale,
Mhm.
and just taking that project of figuring out what the problems are like very seriously, you talk to you read some of the reports that Reuters or AP and other places were kind of writing, and they were interviewing like Hispanic Trump voters, and they were saying things about the economy. They were talking about inflation. There was um some talk about uh one there's a I think CNN interviewed a Hispanic male Trump voter who said the reason he didn't vote for Harris was because he felt like the Democrats made him feel ashamed of himself.
Interesting.
It's I this is to say that there is no singular unifying reason for why Hispanic voters did not vote for Harris. just as there is no singular reason for why Black voters voted for Harris. So I
Mhm.
think I think the answer really just involves just talking and trying to sort of organize from there if one is committed to continuing to organize. I mean, that's the big question. I have folks that I've talked to, it's a sense of exhaustion and a sense that, well, we're just going to have to let folks fall on their sword,
Mm. And
you
I
know?
think you bring
Yeah.
up a good point on how did Trump win over these voters, especially in swing states that he was able to flip this election. So I'm going to press on this as far as what is your take on why the Hispanic voters, Asian voters, non-Black racial minorities voted more for Trump than we saw Black voters do?
Okay, so there is a article that came out, piece that came out in The Guardian. I guess it was maybe a week after the election. And the headline was the conventional reasons for explaining why Trump won, might not hold up. And the thesis of the piece was actually we need to sort of think about what happens during COVID in the
Hmm,
United States in terms of like social policy. What happens is that in this brief sliver of time, the United States essentially is a social democracy.
hmm,
You're saying social insurance, you're saying unemployment insurance, you're saying rent extensions,
right.
right? People are getting direct cash payments.
Stimmies.
STEMIs, they're getting STEMIs, right? And this creates the context for it. This creates an expectation. People expect this is what the government, this is their role, this is what they're supposed to do.
Right. You showed us that you can. So
Showed
now
us that you can
our
do it, do
desire.
it.
Right.
So I'm actually attracted to this theory because I think it suggests that many voters, many non-black voters, um, might have been voting on the expectation that like I heard, for example, that you heard these like some like black you heard this among like black folks too. It's like, oh yeah, Trump gave us stimmies
Right. I've heard that so
that
many
he's
times.
trying to take. And actually, if you peel back the layers and think about what is actually being communicated there, it's about this expectation that one expects. And then they connected it to Trump, even though it's total BS.
Right.
Trump
Kind
had
of
nothing to do
false
with it.
confirmation.
So you get so there's disinformation, there's a sort of lack of education about how these things work. There is the expectation that the government is supposed to do this consistently over and over again. That all gets like, slowly during the Biden administration, all those COVID policies essentially, they die in the cradle. So you have this really kind of difficult situation where people are connecting uh, Trump to their well-being during this crisis. I mean, it's a memory hole because as we know, the it was a very difficult time. Many folks died. Trump
Yeah.
oversaw that. I mean, he did not care. I mean, it's total lack of care and concern.
Hmm.
But Trump also sort of benefited from a disinformation ecosystem with
Hmm.
non-traditional media, podcasting, and everything.
Hmm.
And you know, this ecosystem attracts many people who are kind of predisposed to conspiracy theories, who are predisposed to, sort of imprecise, sort of incorrect ideas about the economy, about
And
social
I
life.
still don't quite understand about this because this is the same president and the same Republican Party who are anti-handouts and like anti just give you whatever you want. And so for the pandemic centered benefits to be why voters chose him, I'm like, but wait a second, I thought you didn't believe
Exactly.
in handouts.
Exactly. So what's going on? So I think part of what is going on is, and I think folks, I really hope that we see more reporting in writing about Trump's use, his exploitation of a media ecosystem.
Okay.
Because I think part of what happens is like they're targeting ads, Facebook, IG, all over the place that are targeted at specific groups to
Right.
say, like, okay, when it comes to like STEMIs, or like, for example, like I have relatives who flirted with the idea of voting for Trump, and
Okay.
their line was something like, oh, you press them, why you vote for Trump? It's like, oh, okay, well, Trump wants to eliminate taxes on overtime pay.
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, so is are you just single issue voters? Is that it? And the reality is for a lot of people, um, it's it the they are thinking about, that paycheck, that, and I
Money in
think
the pocket. Yeah.
yeah, they're thinking about that pocket, and it matters a lot. And I think it's easy to mobilize disinformation around the economy when folks are feeling the kind of different are feeling the economic benefits of, kind of economic policies like the Inflation Reduction Act. They're not feeling it the same, or
Mm.
then if they're feeling it at all. So then it's like this messaging problem for Democrats, because
Right.
they're like, okay, well, um, inflation. Look, inflation is down, or look, inflation is, or the economy is on the mend, and
Right.
you can't mobilize economic data, just say like, okay, y'all, look, the numbers show that the economy is improved when people's material situation does not reflect that.
Right, right. And I think the real life impact is exactly how voters vote, right? How is this going to help me? I got bills to pay, mouths to feed, furniture is expensive.
Yeah,
I'm doing a little DIY project in my apartment. I'm like, what? Shelves are $100?
exactly.
So
Exactly.
I know we focused on Trump up until this point, but let's turn now to the Democrats. They got their clocks cleaned in this election. What is the immediate retooling that you want to see them do before midterms in 2 years, or even before the next presidential election in four?
What I want them to do, they're not going to do it. But
Say
I'll throw my wish out there. I think the Democrats really need to lean in on a bold populist agenda.
it. Hmm,
I think they need to run on and advocate for paid sick leave. I think they need to advocate for extending dealing with the housing crisis.
hmm,
I think we need to sort of think about how to deal with the debt crisis.
hmm,
I'm not convinced that they're going to push that agenda. They also have a very serious PR problem on their hands, which can be summed up in the fact that the leadership is really old.
hmm. Yeah.
I mean, just
That came up. That was a big part of the conversation before Biden dropped out. Hmm.
yeah. I think the leadership is old, and I think they're committed to um, kind of middle of the road piecemeal solutions to a really big crisis. You cannot solve the crisis that we're facing when it comes to climate, when it comes to housing, when it comes to the economy, uh, by going small. You can't. And
So two left, and you lose the central swing voters. So it's
so
it's the balance.
it's a tricky thing, but I will say that and this goes back to the kind of status of the coalitions that have sustained the Democratic Party up to this point anyway.
Right.
They've mostly sort of oriented around for a long time it was working class, kind of a multiracial working class base. I think that is still the case.
Hmm.
Um, but a significant portion in this election moved in the direction of Trump.
Right.
So the question is, how do you bring those folks back?
Right.
And I think the answer is economic. And I think at the same time, I am not all that interested in, like liberals, folks on the left really want to do this whole like let's kind of counter the culture war with the culture war of our own. We don't have the propaganda machine to do that. And I also think the country is more predisposed and habituated to anti-blackness, racism, and white supremacy. So it's hard to push back against it. Not impossible, but this is why I think like really taking organizing very seriously.
Yeah.
And this gets to a deeper problem, which is
Okay.
about democracy.
Mm.
And the fact that I think the fact is that we do not in the United States have the kind of commons, the kind of spaces that enable us to really debate, reflect, think, and organize together. We
Right.
don't. I think we are very much kind of isolated individuals. You know, we come together, uh, and we you know we show up in public. But at the same time, it's not that we're not doing the kind of democratic thing. So this was like kind of one of the problems that I kind of had with Harris's kind of messaging because it's like I think organizing the campaign around protecting democracy, I think that's right.
Right. But it's
I
not.
don't think no, I don't think we have the framework for people to embrace that appeal and say, okay, well, yeah, I'm democracy is important, you know, and you actually listen to some of the reporting. People were saying like, yeah, I know Trump is a piece of shit. I know he's authoritarian, but my pocket. And we have to ask, what has to happen for people to think in that way?
Right. I spoke to a few Black Trump supporters, and they said, yeah, I know he's racist, and it wasn't a determining factor for me because the economy, because healthcare. And I was like, hey, man, thanks for your honest answer. Appreciate it. And it's really eye-opening to hear the reasoning behind, kind of going back to what you were saying about actually having the conversation. I was talking to a Democrat who said, I don't even have Trump supporter friends. I don't talk to them. I don't want them in my life. I'm like, I feel a little cringy about not associating with people purely because of their political thoughts. To me, I'm just not ready to plant that flag yet. Yes, protecting peace and boundaries and all of that, but there has to be kind of like what you were describing as far as the community building and getting back to what can we agree on, and kind of go from there. So we've talked about right after the election, we've talked about from November 5th to present day and looking ahead 2 or 4 years from now. But now, specifically after he takes office in January, can you just preview what this second Trump presidency might look like, specifically for Black people in this country, and the policies you expect to see that may have the most impact on us?
Yeah, I mean, I- it's I think it's gonna be a difficult time. I think it's gonna be a difficult time. I think you can expect to see a further eroding of the kind of social safety net policies that benefit African American voters. You're going to see, I think, an erosion of Social Security. You're at least going to see an argument or kind of debates folding out into the public about, particularly on the Republican side, about these things. That'll create a context, and I should also say that this erosion of the social safety net that I think we're going to see in the during the Trump presidency is also not unrelated to the sort of conversations on the right about DEI.
Okay, yeah,
Because what they've done is they've connected. I mean, they've connected the diversification of America with the social safety net, so that to expand the social safety net is essentially to benefit Black folk or to benefit non-white people.
right,
Um, and I think we're gonna have to sort of fight against that. I think it's gonna be really challenging. I think the question are is the betrayal final? Is that feeling of betrayal final? Is it can one learn to love again, to use a metaphor?
right,
Um, can we come back together and like, okay, we deal with our wounds, but we're like, okay, yeah, let's grieve and let's figure out how we get back into it. Because
right,
I think when you think about like uh uh Mass deportation, for example. They're not just coming for
Right.
for Hispanic folk. They're not.
Right.
They're not. And so it's like even so I think to some degree, some of the antipathy or the sense of betrayal also has to confront we have to confront reality. And the reality is that if they're coming for one particular group, we're not that far
Right. What do
from
you think is going to be the light switch moment to turn that antipathy to let's just deal with the reality?
yeah. I think folks are going to just have to come face to face with the policies as they unfold.
Yeah.
And, you have to we have to deal with that as we often do,
Mhm.
pragmatically.
Right.
We have to weigh our level of risk. And we have to weigh, you know, this question of like, what sense does it make to kind of just sit back and wait things out? We do not have that luxury. Many of us don't have that luxury.
Right. And I think that wraps up this conversation in a neat bow. Thank you, Jared. However, I do feel compelled to end on a happy note since this was a very realist conversation. So, what was the highlight of 2024 for you? New Year's is just around the corner.
Oh my goodness. I cooked a lot for friends and people. I love to host. It was a very like, I don't know. I like the joy um of giving. I like the joy of watching somebody taste something. I'm like, oh yeah, that's good. Thank you. So I want to keep doing that. I'm gonna keep breaking bread with my friends in 2025.
That's great. This year at Thanksgiving, I made the yams
Whew.
and last year as well, but it just felt like such a rite of passage.
Oh my God, was this the first time? Was this your first time making them?
I made it last year as well, but that was more so like following the instructions, and this was just autopilot. So I'm like, yeah, Randy, you
Oh,
got
you got it now. You got it now.
it. Jared, thank you. And these conversations are ongoing. I'm sure I'll be hitting you up in the new year because there will be more to discuss as updates become available. So, Jared Loggins, everyone.
Thank you.